name is Jess Seitz, and I'm the co-founder of JobStream AI, and I'm with my business partner and other co-founder, Adonis McReynolds. And today's episode is about identity, which Adonis is like a master and he knows all the things. So he's going to take the lead, but I'm going to chime in when I can. So take it away.
Yeah, well, I would be very I'm full of trepidation to say I'm the master of really anything. I think there's a lot of things that I'm somewhat knowledgeable about, but there's a lot of things that I'm very unknowledgeable about, and people may disagree with some of the views that I hold. But the biggest reason why Jess and I wanted to put a video like this out there is because people underestimate the importance of identity when it comes to their job search. Jess and I have witnessed many people who come to us and they go, I'm not really sure what I want to do. I just know that I need a job. And so they're just wildly applying everywhere, right? And I think we can all agree, anybody watching this video, it's not really ideal when you're job searching and you don't know what to job search for. You're applying to construction sites, and then the next thing you're applying to a kitchen, and the next thing you're applying to, be a exhibit administrator at NASA or something. It's just, you gotta find your path, right? You gotta find one set path in which you can really anchor yourself and discover the best opportunities for you. So we're gonna kind of break down first and foremost, kind of like a pre-existing 5-step framework, so to speak, of what really constitutes a person's identity. And then we're going to go into how we ultimately problem solve this for candidates and help get them on the right track. So I wanted to start off by kind of giving you guys who are watching this video a little bit of an idea of what we discuss. So the first part of an identity framework is understanding essentially the line of or the hierarchy of how things go down. The first thing that every single person must have in order to really understand their identity is they must have an understanding of their worldview. Now, what is a worldview? That could be a very controversial thing in of itself. What is a worldview? The worldview that I'm talking about is what a person believes about their meaning and mission of life. It's a very profound question. If I ask you, what is the meaning of your life? Why do you believe that you exist? And how did you exist? Right? What's the mode by which humanity comes into existence? What do you believe about those things? Believe it or not, those are very deeply profound things that a person must explore in order to really understand what they believe about themselves. Do they believe that they have a certain value in life? Do they believe that everybody's created equal? Do they believe that certain people are created greater than others? There's a number, like more worldviews out there than there probably are people, right? However, you have to understand your own. It's not your job to understand mine. It's not, our job to understand yours. Ultimately, it really comes down to you. You have to determine what your worldview is. And once you determine what that is, now you're on the road to being actually able to identify who you are. The reason why worldview comes first is because that will often influence and trigger what comes next in the framework, which is perspectives. Perspectives really kind of defined are principles and beliefs branching off of your worldview. What you hold to be your existential purpose, if you will influence your perspective and the way that you think about yourself and your life and your beliefs, right? So if you're somebody who holds that there's a God, right, and your worldview is, I live to please God, your perspective is going to be, I can't do things that don't please God because that's out of alignment with my worldview. That's your perspective. If you're somebody who believes that, they're a product of evolution, for example, you may not hold that same boundary, right? Your perspective might be more along the lines of, this is my life. I get to do what I want to do because it's my life. And there's nobody to tell me otherwise, right? Because we're all just kind of products of, a spontaneous event of creation or existence, right? So different worldviews, people are going to have disagreements on which worldview is correct. We're not here to talk about which worldview is correct. We're just here to tell you about how worldviews and perspectives work. Branching off of that, you have thoughts, right? Everybody has thoughts constantly, and our thoughts usually are the seeds in our mind that are either planted externally or we generate them internally, right? If Jessica comes up to me and says, "Don't think about elephants," she has planted a thought in my mind, right? If you've seen the movie Inception, you know what I'm talking about, right? And the same line is used: "Don't think about elephants. What do you think about? Elephants." So a thought can be planted externally within you, or you can generate a thought based off of your own contemplation, your perspectives, and your worldview, right? And so internally and externally, you're not immune from these. These happen constantly in your mind, and it becomes your responsibility essentially to organize these thoughts and or to act on these thoughts or not act on them. Which leads me to the fourth part of the framework, which is actions. Actions always, I can't say always because sometimes we act irrationally, but most of the time when we take a certain action, it's a premeditated action. We make an act of the will. And the will is determined by what we believe, right? And so everything kind of just goes right back up the ladder. You have worldview, perspective, thoughts, and then you have actions that follow those thoughts. And then, of course, as everybody knows, every action has a consequence or an outcome, right? So we kind of put that at the very bottom of the rung. For somebody who's looking for a job and they take the action of applying, there's going to be an outcome. You're either not going to get it or you are going to get it, or maybe no one will read it. There's a number of different outcomes. But the point is, you have to go all the way back up to the top of worldview to be able to trace your outcomes and see why things are going the way that they're going. This is our philosophical view. So I'm going to pause and kind of allow Jess to speak on what I just said. Certainly, Jess had the opportunity when we first met to kind of dialogue with me on these things, and even took advantage of an opportunity to fill out what we call our identity form, which now is introduced to JobStream AI as a way of candidates being able to find that path and be able to understand where they align on all of these topics, which are always fun.
Yeah, exactly. I think everything you said is super profound, but so important, because it's not something you think about. Like when I was starting my job search, when I was like 16, 17, getting my first job, like, of course, I didn't think about any of this. I was just like, oh, what's hiring? And then that's okay kind of when you're like young and you're in high school and you're working part-time. But when it really is your full-time job, your full-time career, like the point is you're spending at least 40 hours a week there doing it. So you want to be happy in what you're doing. You want to be fulfilled. Of course, there's going to be some bad days, some good days, but overall, you should be spending the majority of 40 hours a week being happy and being fulfilled. And that's impossible to do, or a lot harder to do, if you don't run through this framework. So if you've never stopped to think like, what is my worldview? What are my perspectives? How does the perspective influence my thoughts? And what kind of actions am I taking? It just makes it harder for you to get to a job that's really fulfilling and to find like meaning and purpose in your work. And it might be like part of my worldview and thoughts is like your job isn't your identity. And if you're too wrapped up in your job, like it could cause sadness and depression because, let's say you lose your job or you had a bad day at work, then it becomes your whole life is over. So we don't want to get like so wrapped up in everything, but it is still a large part of what you're doing. And through your job, you can make a really big difference in the world. So stopping to think about like, what is my worldview? What is my purpose? Because like Adonis had mentioned to me the other day, everyone says like they want to change the world or make the world a better place. But making the world a better place is very abstract until you know like what you mean, because there's so many ways that you could do that. As Adonis mentioned to me, like selling ice cream could make the world a better place because, who doesn't love ice cream? And kids are happy and they're eating ice cream with their families and it's tasty. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. So if that's the way that you want to make the world a better place, then you can get a job as an ice cream man and have a nice ice cream truck, and why not? So those are the way. I just want to make it like relevant how it connects to getting a job and why it really is important to take the time to run through this framework. And it's not just like for fun and for philosophy. Like it really can change your life if you take it seriously.
That's very well said. And I appreciate the ice cream reference from the other day. I think most people would love to sell ice cream for a living because that's not something you have to sell, right? People love it. And it's certainly, you put it out there and certain people will take it and other people won't, but it's not going to change your life financially, right? So there is that component. So talking points that we have for today based off of that framework that I've laid out of worldview, perspectives, thoughts, actions, and outcomes, all being branched together. They're all part of one tree, so to speak. with worldview being the root, right? And the outcomes being the fruit of that root. We were going to talk a little bit today and ask some questions that will be helpful for you as an observer to really kind of identify, what it is that you want to do. So the first question that we ask, and I'll pose this question to Jessica and see what she says. What do you believe is the difference between what you do or want to do versus your existential purpose?
Yeah, that's a super great question. So, like, let's say my existential purpose is like, yeah, I really want to make the world a better place. Like, well, like I'll say what I actually do. So, my biggest value, my biggest worldview, everything is for me, it's freedom. Like, I want to be free in everything that I do, and that's why running my own business gave me the freedom that I want, and why it makes me so happy, and to do it every day. And from that freedom, it also helped me make the world a better place, because when I'm working with business, like when I started marketing, I was helping businesses get more clients, get more sales, and that was changing their life as a business owner, and also changing the customer's life, because they had a product or a service that was a solution to the problem. So, like, let's say someone is selling like a gym membership, like a special package, and it helps you lose 20 pounds in 30 days. So like that person has now a better, healthier life. So I was helping multiple people do that. So sorry, do you want to like repeat again what you're, yeah, so the difference between—
No, you answered the question, sort of. So basically what I'm getting at, and I can kind of answer it in my own way as well, so you can kind of get the concept. So the difference between an existential purpose and what somebody actually does could either be zero, or it could be like worlds apart, right? So like, let's say my goal in life is to bring happiness to people, right? But then I work at a pound or like a dog shelter, right? It's like, am I really bringing? And this may be like a really grim comparison, but like this just goes to show, like, you believe the purpose of your life is to bring joy to people, and then you're working at a dog shelter where you're putting down dogs and doing all that kind of stuff. Like, is that really in alignment with like what you want to do, right? So I think that kind of illustrates that there can be a very wide gap. Or like in your situation, Jess, you believe that, it's part of your existential purpose in a sense is to help people with finding meaningful employment, right? And so here we are doing JobStream AI. And so you're fulfilling that existential purpose. And so your purpose and your job actually align, which is always ideal. There's nobody in the world that doesn't want that, I don't think. So we can't all be what we technically want to be. In some cases, there are times where we have to take responsibility for, other people and sacrifice things that we want to do in order to work. But ideally speaking, as a job seeker, you want to have in mind your existential purpose. So that way you take a job that's in alignment with who you are and what you do. Question 2, why there should ideally be alignment between your existential purpose and your daily role in association. So I think you understand that question, right, Jess? Did you have any questions about that?
Yeah, no, I think I get it. I mean, like, why? To me, is just so you'll be fulfilled, you'll be happy, and you'll look forward to coming to work every day, and you'll give it your best, and it becomes a win-win. Because if you're happy to be there and you're showing up and you're giving it your all, then any boss or any superior that you have is going to notice that, and that's going to open more opportunities for you, more doors. And it's just like, why not for your own sake? If you're going to be there, if you're going to be at your desk or in an office for 40 hours a week, like, of course you're going to want it to be happy. Like, you want it to, the purpose and what you're doing to come together, so that you're like, I know why I'm sitting in front of this computer today. I know why I'm showing up to this job every day, and I'm happy because it aligns with my values and my worldview.
That's right. Your why, right? Like, why do I work here? Because it fulfills like my existential purpose, right? Why do I do what I do for work? Because I believe that it fulfills my existential purpose. That it always comes back to that, right? Like who you are at your core and what you believe you're supposed to be doing. Sometimes it takes people a while to find that, but and sometimes, by the way, somebody's understanding of their existential purpose is prone to change. In fact, this happens quite often. Sometimes people think that they're meant to do one thing, and then later on in their life, they come to find out that it's another thing that they're meant to do, right? We'll talk a little bit more about that kind of subtle problem, right, in shortly, but I just wanted to kind of bring that up as like a worldview that somebody might have, or a perspective somebody might have on that, is that existential purpose sometimes is not just one thing over the course of an entire lifetime. The third question is, how do we develop a set of unchanging principles that guide us in the direction we want to go?
Okay, so honestly, that's a really tough question for me. I think maybe you're gonna need to take that one because, like I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah. So basically, there's no way to guarantee that your principles, your thoughts, your actions, your perspectives will stay the same unless at the very, very bottom root part, which is your worldview, unless you're anchored in your worldview, right? And that worldview dictates to you a very specific set of rules by which you have to follow in order for that worldview to exist, then your principles will constantly change. That's just the reality of it, right? Because anybody who's not anchored in a worldview and is prone to constantly changing is going to change their principles, is going to change their perspectives, is going to eventually change their actions because those things trickle down and the outcomes will be significantly different. So the answer to that is you always go back to the root. If you want to stay the same, you make the root unmovable, right? You really anchor down and you make sure that you're committed to what it is that you believe. Some people don't want to do this, right? Like it's a cumbersome life to be anchored in one worldview and to be unchanging, so to speak, throughout your whole life to most people. But it's also a blessing in disguise because the more anchored you are, the less confusion you have in your life, right? Like if you're constantly changing your views, you could end up being somebody who's, doing really, really well in life to, now you're, not doing so well and then you're doing well again. So you kind of have like this roller coaster of like, I don't know what I believe. I'm kind of changing my views. I want to do this and then I want to do that. And it's kind of like that person who can never just settle down and be happy with one person, right? Why is that? Because they're always changing their mind about like what they like and what they enjoy. And oh, maybe I don't like this, or maybe I don't really want to experience that. And so commitment is the key there. Commitment is hard, especially when it comes to your worldview. So people are committed to a worldview oftentimes, but they don't realize that, that worldview might be a little bit unstable, causing them to have different perspectives and understandings of things. So there's a number of different things at play, but to be anchored, the two things that I really think about is your commitment to your worldview. And number two, kind of being unwavering in your principles when it comes to that worldview, because every worldview dictates principles. So it's kind of like a high level answer, so to speak. But perhaps maybe you agree, disagree, it's up. We don't have to debate, so to speak, on the call. But I don't know, like if you had any thoughts on what I said.
No, I think that's a really good way to answer, and it makes perfect sense. I don't think like it has to be 100% rigid because there's just natural growth and natural changes in worldview, and that's good. And we want to encourage that. Like you shouldn't be the same exact person you were at 10 years old when you are 45 years old, because imagine like there's going to be a lot of problems if you have the mindset and maturity of a 10-year-old. But at the same time, like if you have there's always like stuff about you that you are at the core. Like I was always a very independent person. My parents tell me stories when I was a baby, and I'm still an independent person today. And because I'm so independent, I value freedom, and I run my own business because I like the freedom that it gives me to be my own boss. And I like that I'm in control of helping people the way I want to help them. But my worldview did change, my perspective, whatever shifted. And that's how I ended up starting JobStream AI, because I started to get a little bit burnt out and I felt like I wasn't making that much of a difference. And I was helping like really big multi-million-dollar businesses and not really helping the little guy. And I really started to shift into a perspective where I wanted to help the little guy more. And then that's how JobStream AI was born. And I'm super happy that I got to like shift and mold a little bit, because then I wouldn't be here talking to you and I wouldn't be making a difference in individual people's lives, and I would only be making a difference in large companies, which there's nothing wrong with doing that too, but I prefer to like have a balance of both. So just like that's something I would bring to the table.
Yeah, for sure. Perspectives definitely can change as you mature and you get older and you kind of see life a little bit more fully. Worldviews change. I mean, I'm a perfect example of that. I held one worldview that was very rigid for a long time, and now I have, I would say, a less rigid worldview, but it is pretty locked in. Like I am committed to what I believe and I'm committed to the principles that come with those beliefs. But yeah, I mean, the answer ultimately to that third question of how do you anchor down, really the only way to do that is to commit to thinking one way every single step of the way, right? So in some cases that can be negative, in some cases that can be positive if your worldview is a positive and good worldview, which is a completely subjective conversation, right? You know, it's not completely subjective in the sense of like, I personally have views on what is the correct worldview, but again, what's the correct worldview to me may not be the correct worldview for you, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of how we would leave that open-ended for the person who's looking to kind of find their path. The last question that we'll address, and I wanted to make sure that this video is put out for the benefit of those who are looking on and kind of thinking about identity and how it correlates with their search. How to adapt and pivot without deviating from your path, right? So like, let's say you pick the path of cybersecurity. You want to do that, but you want to pivot and you want to adapt because you see that maybe a certain branch of cybersecurity is not doing as well, or something happens in the world. We had this happen with the epidemic, right? There was a number of people that were on a path. The epidemic changed things drastically. Industries that we never thought were going to suffered. People ended up having to change their career path. A lot of them became career coaches or different things. How do we best adapt and pivot without changing our path?
Yeah, so that's a super great question. And I think it also comes down to transferable skills. So it doesn't have to be exactly the same thing, but it's like relevant. So if, like, let's say you were studying data science or whatever, and then you're like, okay, you know what? Instead of going into data analytics, I'm going to go into cybersecurity. Like, it's pretty relevant. So it's like a way to adapt and pivot, but you're still taking the strengths that you have and you're playing to those strengths. So like for me, I started working remotely because I valued freedom and it was fun, but I was still like an employee and I had a boss and I could only do things certain ways. And then I got laid off from that job. And instead of looking for a new job, I decided to pivot and adapt and start my own business. And it worked because I had the transferable skills. Like I had learned how to copyright and I learned how to create graphics and I learned how to do all this marketing. So I had the skill. And now I was just going to play to my strengths, which is like being disciplined, being driven, and start my business. So that's like a certain way to adapt and pivot. Like I could have said, oh no, I lost my remote job, so I guess I have to go to an office now and get a 9 to 5, and that's the only way. But instead I was like, oh, you know what, I'm going to just start my own business now. So that's like an example, I think, of how you can adapt and pivot, but still, keep your principles, keep your worldview, and everything stays aligned.
Yep. Yeah, this question is important because there were some people who really thrived during the epidemic, and you could tell that they were very well prepared in the ways that you just kind of described, Jess. They had skills that were very high income skills that would work in any industry, in any space. So regardless of what path you choose in terms of industry, if your industry gets shut down, but you have a really great transferable skill that you specialize in, or multiple skills that make you incredibly valuable to any kind of company, that's one of the best ways that you can adapt and pivot without necessarily changing your path, right? And when we talk about path, I guess we should be a little bit more descriptive of what that means, meaning like what you do as a practice, right? Like if you are currently an administrative assistant, right? And you want to be able to adapt and pivot. You're going to have to continue to learn what it means to be a top-notch administrative person, or maybe you hold the view that administration and the need for that type of a practice is changing, right? So it's on us to be aware of when certain practices and verticals are starting to change or disappear. After the epidemic, what we kind of saw was AI came to the forefront, right? A lot of AI and a lot of remote work and a lot of that kind of stuff started becoming prevalent. So we have to keep our eyes on what's changing in the market. You have to study it, study what businesses need. If you're doing your daily research on what companies are finding to be important in the world, you can usually adapt and pivot based on data. And that data is everywhere. Like there's no excuse for us not to have it, right? It's everywhere we look. You can go online and you can get data. You can get data from your friends, especially if you have meaningful connections and really good spots where, or you have trustworthy partners or people that you constantly connect with. Use data. Don't be somebody who flies blind. right? You can adapt and pivot so long as you understand where to go. So that's another reason why working with us makes a lot of sense, because both of us have braved through this market. Both of us have had success in this market. Both of us have helped others have success in this market. So there's a sense in which, working with us actually gives you the data you need to adapt and pivot successfully and stay on the path ultimately that you want to be on, so long as that path is a safe and good path for you moving forward, right? Any other comments on that, Jess, before we get to the last point on identity?
No, that's great. I think that was super clear, and we're at the 25-minute mark, so we don't want to take too much more time.
Right. So we'll keep it clear and quick. Sustainability. How do we achieve sustainability? How can we sustain a really good career? How can we make it to where we're like a plant firmly rooted, right? Where like even the strongest of winds won't just tear us out of our location.
Yeah, so my answer to that is actually like funny, because we want to be like anchored and strong and rooted, which we really do. But I think to do that, it's to be adaptable and to constantly be learning, constantly leveling up new skills. If you're the type of person who's naturally curious and loves to learn, it's going to be easier for you, because that is really just how to find fulfillment in life, fulfillment in your career, to get advances in your career. Because if like you came in year one and you never learned a new skill at all, then of course in year 3 or 4 or 5, why would your boss look at you to promote you if you're like still doing the only thing you've ever done in year one? So the point is that you want to stay anchored and rooted in how you are as a person, in your worldview, and the type of difference you're making. But you want to be able to adapt and change and constantly learn and have these new things and these new knowledges coming in to make yourself anchored, if that makes sense.
The most sense. Yeah. I mean, being anchored is I could say really understanding who you are and continuing to improve that, right? And so there's, like Jess said, many ways to do that. You could take a new class on something that you've never learned before that's going to be meaningful to a business in your career. You could upgrade your skills. There's never anything wrong with getting a coach and improving your game, whatever it is that you do. If you're a salesperson, I mean, everyone's got to go to the gym and get strong, right? And so sales coaching in a way is kind of a way of getting strong. You're practicing the things that you already know to be true, but you're practicing those mental muscles and flexing them. Same thing goes with marketing. If you're a marketer and that's what you do for a living, most likely you're probably going to want to coach, a mentor, somebody who can help guide you along that path, right? And so for each of us to have a mentor, to have somebody to look to for advice, somebody who's also learning and evolving, and somebody who has been anchored in their career, ideally, those are the kind of people you want to gravitate to. And I think that's really one of the key things to keep in mind. The more connected you are to anchored people, they say birds of a feather, right, flock together. So if you're with other anchored people, the likelihood of you adapting those habits and receiving those insights and tips on how to actually implement it in your own life is going to be quite abundant. So that's what I would advise in terms of sustainability. Always sustain your relationships, always sustain your learning, as Jess was saying. And like she also said, never see any day that goes by as not an opportunity to improve your skills. Always look for ways to improve your skills, because if you're constantly learning, growing, and developing, companies are going to see you and be like, wow, like you're ahead of the curve. You're doing what you're supposed to do. Like you have a place, right, with us. So do those things. Don't take those things lightly. And if you're ever curious about how to navigate the job market, given these details, and you want to learn more about identity and how you fit into the picture of where companies are going, give us a call. If you have been in touch with either one of us, schedule a meeting. Visit us at jobstreamai.com, and we very much look forward to working with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great place to end it. So see you in the next video.